This photograph was taken in February 1959 in the Ural Mountains of the Soviet Union. It shows a tent belonging to 9 experienced hikers, young, fit, and trained for the conditions they were walking into. They had done this before. They knew what they were doing. When rescue teams found this tent, the hikers were gone. They had cut through the fabric from the inside and fled into the night in temperatures as low as -30 degrees Celsius, without boots, without proper clothing, without their equipment. All 9 of them died, and to this day, no one has been able to fully explain why they ran. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, and it remains one of the most forensically examined, most debated, and most genuinely unexplained events of the 20th century. In January 1959, a group of 10 hikers set out from the city of Sverdlovsk, now Yekaterinburg, in the Soviet Union. They were students and graduates of the Ural Polytechnic Institute, led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an experienced mountaineer and engineer. Their goal was to reach Otorten, a mountain in the northern Urals, completing a route that would earn each of them the highest Soviet hiking certification. It was ambitious. It was also well within their capabilities. Most of them had completed comparable expeditions before. The group consisted of 9 men and 2 women. One member, Yuri Yudin, turned back early due to illness, a decision that would save his life and haunt him for the rest of it. He died in 2013, still searching for answers about what happened to his friends. On January 28th, the remaining 9 continued deeper into the mountains. They were experienced, they were equipped, they were prepared. On February 1st, 1959, they made camp on the slope of a mountain the local Mansi people called Kolatsiakal. In the Mansi language, that name translates as Dead Mountain. The group had arranged to send a telegram on completing their route. When no telegram arrived by February 12th, family members raised concern. A search and rescue operation was organized, initially made up of volunteer students and staff from the university, later joined by military aircraft and aircraft. On February 26th, searchers located the tent on the slope of Dead Mountain. What they found stopped them cold. The tent had been cut open from the inside, not unzipped, not unfastened, but sliced through the fabric. Footprints led away from the tent down the slope toward a nearby forest, roughly 1.5 kilometers away. The prints suggested the hikers had left in a hurry, some barefoot, some in socks, some wearing only one boot. They followed the footprints. At the edge of the forest, beneath a large cedar tree, they found the first 2 bodies, Yuri Durashenko and Yuri Krivonishenko. They were in their underwear. There were signs that they had attempted to build a fire. Their hands were burned, suggesting they had reached into the flames with their bare hands, perhaps to stay conscious, perhaps in desperation. 3 more bodies were found between the cedar tree and the tent: Igor Dyatlov, Zina Kolmogorova, and Ruslan Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been trying to return to the tent when they died. Slobodin had a small crack in his skull, though this was not believed to have been immediately fatal. The last 4 hikers were not found until May, when the snow melted enough to reveal them in a ravine roughly 70 meters from the cedar tree. What the autopsies found on those last 4 would change the nature of this case entirely. The first 5 hikers died of hypothermia. Tragic, but in the context of fleeing into sub-zero temperatures without proper clothing, not entirely inexplicable. The last 4 were different. Nikolai Thibault-Brignoles had major skull damage. Ludmila Dubinina and Semyon Zolotarev had severe chest fractures, multiple broken ribs, bilateral in Dubinina's case. The Soviet medical examiner who conducted the autopsies stated that the force required to cause those fractures was comparable to a car crash, and yet there were no external wounds, no bruising on the skin consistent with a direct blow. The damage was internal. Ludmila Dubinina was also missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her lips. This has been one of the most discussed and disturbing details of the entire case. Investigators at the time attributed this to natural decomposition, as her body had been submerged in running water for several months. Many researchers accept this explanation. Others have found it insufficient. One additional detail that drew significant attention at the time: several of the hikers' clothing tested positive for elevated levels of radiation. This finding was included in the original Soviet investigation and then buried for decades in classified files.
The Soviet investigation concluded in May 1959. The official finding was that the hikers died as a result of a compelling natural force, a phrase so vague it explained nothing. The files were classified. The case was closed, and for 30 years, almost no one outside the Soviet Union knew it had happened. Since the files were declassified and the case re-examined by Russian authorities in 2019, the number of proposed explanations has grown considerably. Let us walk through the most credible ones. The first theory is a snow slab avalanche. The 2019 Russian reinvestigation concluded that a small avalanche struck or threatened the tent, forcing the group to cut their way out and flee quickly to avoid being buried. Researchers at the University of Bern published a study in 2021 supporting this conclusion. This would explain the decision to flee without equipment and the severe internal injuries. Being struck and compressed by a dense snow slab can cause exactly that kind of damage without leaving surface bruising. Critics of this theory point out that the slope was not steep enough to produce a classic avalanche, and that experienced mountaineers would have camped clear of avalanche risk. The second theory is infrasound-induced panic. Some researchers have proposed that low-frequency sound waves produced by wind moving across certain mountain formations may have caused severe psychological distress, disorientation, and panic in the group. This theory is difficult to prove or disprove. It does not explain the physical injuries. The third theory involves military testing or rocket debris. The Ural region was an active zone for Soviet military testing in 1959. Some researchers have proposed that the hikers may have been struck by debris from a malfunctioning rocket or missile test, which would account for both the physical trauma and the radiation readings. No direct evidence of missile debris at the scene has ever been confirmed. The fourth theory is hypothermia and paradoxical undressing. A well-documented phenomenon called paradoxical undressing occurs in the late stages of hypothermia, when the body's heat regulation system fails and the person feels an intense burning sensation, causing them to remove their clothing. Combined with terminal burrowing, another end-stage hypothermia behavior, it may account for the ravine location of the last 4 bodies. This theory works for the first 5 deaths. It does not adequately explain the severe internal injuries on the last 4. Here is what the evidence confirms, without embellishment. 9 experienced hikers cut their way out of their tent in the middle of the night in extreme cold and fled down a mountain slope without adequate clothing or equipment. 5 died of hypothermia. 4 suffered catastrophic internal injuries inconsistent with a simple fall. Some of their clothing carried elevated radiation. The Soviet government classified the investigation for 3 decades. The official conclusion named a compelling natural force and went no further. The 2021 avalanche study is the most scientifically rigorous explanation to date, and it accounts for many, though not all, of the documented facts. Russian authorities closed their reinvestigation in 2020, citing the avalanche theory as the most probable cause. And yet, the missing tongue, the radiation, the internal injuries with no external marks, the classified files. These details sit at the edge of every proposed explanation and do not quite fit inside any of them. That is not an invitation to leap to the extraordinary. It is simply an acknowledgement that the complete picture, 65 years later, remains just out of reach. Igor Dyatlov was 23 years old. His friends were students, engineers, dreamers, people who loved the mountains because the mountains made them feel alive. Whatever happened on that slope on the night of February 1st, 1959, happened in minutes. And it happened in the dark, in the cold, far from anyone who could help. Yuri Yudin, the one who turned back, lived until 2013. He spent 54 years trying to understand what he had been spared from. He never got his answer. The Dyatlov Pass is still there. People still hike it, and the mountain the Monsey people named Dead Mountain has never offered an explanation. What do you think happened? The avalanche theory is the most accepted, but does it account for everything you just heard? Leave your theory in the comments. I read every single one, and the best ones genuinely change how I think about these cases. We are building toward 100,000 subscribers, and every comment, every share, every person who hits subscribe brings us one step closer to the reveal. Thank you for being part of this. I will see you in the next video.